Ghostbusters, one of the most iconic franchises ever to come out of the 1980s. From the first movie that still holds up incredibly well, to comics, the marvelous animated series The Real Ghostbusters, to its follow-up series Extreme Ghostbusters, video games and merchandise that range from teas to cosplay items and toys such as the Firehouse and Ecto One herself. A sequel followed in 1989 that, while it was still a hit, was almost a paint-by-the-numbers replay of the first. Number 1, large figure walking through Manhattan. Number 2, Peter Venkman still acting like an ass, if slightly toned down. Number 3, establishing the Ghostbusters as a business again. Number 4, them being accosted and kept out of the way, this time in a psychiatric ward and not a jail cell. It was also criticised for being lightened up and kidified slightly with the lighter tone as opposed to the darker tone of the original, with swearing toned down to non-existent. Dan Aykroyd had been trying for years to get a third movie off the ground, but it was one of those developmental hell situations that left the project languishing for so long. He had ideas to have the third movie in New Year's Eve 1999 that would have seen the OG stopping the end of the world again, which I think some of those elements were used for the supernatural thriller End of Days starring Arnold Schwarzenegger. And he even had an idea for a story that would have tied into the 2012 Mayan calendar. In 2009, to tie in with the 25th anniversary of the original movie, Ghostbusters the video game that was developed by Atari Games, with the script written by Dan Aykroyd and the late Howard Ramis themselves. It incorporated story and aesthetics that would have been in a third movie, had Dan been able to get it done the way he wanted. After the sad passing of Howard Ramis in 2014, Sony announced just days after his death that they would be moving ahead with a third movie. Subtle. I could understand leaving it a month or two before announcing that news, but mere days? Keep it classy, Sony. Columbia moved ahead with a straight-up reboot of the franchise rather than giving the fans what they wanted, which was the third movie in which the boys would have done one last job and then handed the baton to the next generation of Ghostbusters. Ghostbusters 2016, aka Feegbusters, Fembusters, New Busters, or the movie that shall not be named, went ahead with an all-female team directed by Paul Feig, which was met with negative reception from longtime fans to casual fans alike. When you make a condescending marketing campaign that chastises the male audience for not watching it, then going with a lazy plot and treat your male characters as inferior idiots, I really can't think why this didn't work. The movie was a box office bomb that sparked a chain reaction in which Sony lost a whopping $225 million, in which they sold off assets in order to balance their budget accordingly, including the rights to the James Bond movie franchise, their computer division, and Vegas, which was bought by Magix, but still managed by the same developers. Whoops! In comes Jason Reitman, director of Juno, Young Adult, and Tully, and also executive producer on Whiplash. It should be noted he was Brownstone Kid number 2 at the birthday party in Ghostbusters 2. He had a vision of a girl in a field with a proton pack. He didn't know who she was, until later when he could see she was the grandchild of Dr. Egon Spengler. Given only $75 million by Sony in order to revive the franchise after the embarrassment that was 2016, Jason Reitman, along with his father in an executive producer role, sought to bring the long-awaited sequel to 1989's Ghostbusters 2. So, let's strap on the proton packs once again as we revisit Ghostbusters Afterlife. Folks, there's no easy way to say this. This movie starts off dark. Of course, by that opening statement, that's nothing new for Ghostbusters, considering that some of the dark moments from the first two movies, in where you have scenes in Zuul explaining the coming of Gozer, and how Vigo was trying to possess little Oscar in the sequel. But the tone, complemented by the score and the lighting and camera movement, showed that this was not going to be your daddy's Ghostbusters. This had the elements of a horror thriller, akin to more of an 18-rated movie that it pulled up the hairs on the back of your neck. And the way that Egon was kept in shadows, considering that Howard Ramis had passed away 7 years before this movie and used veteran actor Bob Gunton, who is credited as the Ghost Farmer, who you may remember as Captain Benjamin Maxwell from Star Trek The Next Generation. Then the movie deviates away from the Ghostbusters aesthetics to focus on the Spengler family of mother Callie, son Trevor and daughter Phoebe as they're evicted and go live at their newly inherited farmhouse in Summerville, Oklahoma. I like to think of this movie as a metaphor of discovering who you are and what your legacy is. The writing does a good job of Phoebe embracing her legacy and finding that she has more in common with her late grandfather than she knew, while Callie does an equally decent job of rejecting her legacy as the story shows how most people would react if their parent neglected them. Most people found the movie to be very slow-paced in getting to the Ghostbuster aspects, but this is where I think it's important that the movie spent time with the new generation and getting to care about them so that you're invested in them by the time they get to busting ghosts. There were some nice callbacks to the previous movies, but there were some moments that just left me in disbelief.
No, just check the glove box.
Egon, what the hell? But because Gozer was being brought back into the fold, it meant that elements were being repeated from the first movie, such as Vince Clortho and Zool possessing people. In this case, it was Callie, and the kid's teacher, Mr. Gruberson.
What a lovely singing voice you must have.
One moment that was an emotional callback to the first movie was this.
Ready?
I'll be waiting.
Folks, I need a moment.
A few moments later.
Nope, still can't do it.
1 week later.
Okay, folks, okay. I'm good. Whew. That moment really spoke to my childhood. And the moment we all waited for.
Hey, Flat Top! Have you missed us?
Are you a god?
Oh no, really? We're doing this again?
Are you a god?
No.
Then...
Ray? Oh, come on, Ray. Yes.
The OGs are simply outmatched, even with crossing the streams that sent Gozer home the first time, and Venkman does his best deflecting to make it look like Gozer made a mistake like they could have been the perfect power couple, of which I don't think Dan was acting with his reaction.
You got a lot of nerve. Coming back here, crawling back to me. We could have been the most spectacular power couple. You know, my sense of fun
and then it's Phoebe standing alone, adorning her grandfather's proton pack. And just when all seems lost, an ally comes to her aid. And the moment we waited over 30 years for. The four Ghostbusters together. One last time. The ending is done perfectly, with the OGs reconnecting with Egon's ghost, to the rest of the party congratulating each other on a job well done, and to the moment with Egon interacting with his family, and to the emotional moment where he is forgiven by Callie in probably the most tear-jerking hug as he begins crossing over to the other side as his final work was done, to which you can even read Venkman's lips saying, "I love you." The movie ends with Egon Spengler disappearing into the sky in a cluster of stars to a touching text of, "For Harold," as a tribute to Harold Ramis. This movie was not only a great way of paying tribute to the past, but it also laid the groundwork for the future of the story, in which the baton had been passed to the next generation, and giving Dr. Egon Spengler and his creator, Harold Ramis, the most wonderful send-off anyone could ask for. Without a doubt, she steals the show as the socially awkward and brilliantly scientific-minded grandchild of the late Dr. Egon Spengler. McKenna is just a natural at being awkward and having similar mannerisms to her on-screen grandfather, even down to the glasses that are virtually identical when she compares hers to his. This kid is pure charisma. He has a natural, likable charm from the word go. He plays off of McKenna and Paul Rudd very well, not so much with Finn Wolfhard's Trevor, as he just seems to have no charisma. Of the new Ghostbusters, he seems to be the dullest, as he just seems to be a downer with Phoebe and just all over the place when he's trying to impress Lucky. Celeste has a very dry-wit sense of humour about them in playing Trevor's love interest. In terms of charisma, they balance the team out by adding the necessary charm along with podcast to the new team. I'm gonna be honest here. She displays the emotions of an embittered daughter flawlessly. Believing that her father, the late Egon Spengler, abandoned her and her family when she was young, and the change of heart she shows when she realizes that she was never out of his thoughts. And the forgiveness she displays with the wordless hug at the end is enough to leave any room without a dry eye. I was not expecting him to show up in this picture, and for the less than coffee break appearance he had, he made it work. But he still wants pictures of Spider-Man. Given that she had to mime out the dialogue, which was provided by Shora Agdashlu, Olivia did well with the very elegant performance she put in. Dan slipped right back into character like he never left. He portrays Ray with an air of bitterness in not understanding what Egon did in essentially sabotaging their business, and then has remorse when he and the other Ghostbusters reunite with their deceased comrade. For his coffee break appearance, he works well with the material he's given, and I like the fact that he made something of himself in the financial world, where he becomes the owner of the Ghostbusters by buying back the firehouse and setting up the sequel.
Yeah, I mean, we're all pretty dang special down here. On a personal note, I thought that we had busted up for good. I mean, it wasn't working for me. My friends didn't think so. I know yours.
Oh, good lord above, it's classic Vateman. Pete, you can't charm your way into this one. Murray, like his co-stars, slipped back into character as the smart-mouthed wise-ass of the Ghostbusters like 1989 was yesterday.
Light him up.
Man, I love that sound.
I don't think they were acting there. Dana makes her return in a mid-credit scene, with Karma seemingly catching up with Dr. Vateman for his antics that he did in the opening scenes of the first movie with the ESP tests. Bob Gunton acted the physical performance of Egon in the movie, of which Harold's likeness would be placed onto him in post-production. Harold Ramis appears as Egon through archive footage. It's Ghostbusters, and we can't talk about any movie without talking about the iconic 1959 Cadillac Miller Meteora Sentinel. It made sense that Ecto-1 had to look like it hadn't been used in a while with the way she had been stored in a barn by Egon. But to give the old girl her due, she performed flawlessly. Right from racing across fields to chasing Muncher and to reenacting her first exit from the firehouse with the iconic siren wailing was as good as before. I liked that Egon had made some modifications in his time out in Somerville, in not only adding a gunner seat but also a remote control ecto trap on the chassis of a fast-paced remote control car. A very satisfying moment was seeing her return to the firehouse in the after credits, knowing she'd come home. If you wonder why the visual effects look similar to the first movie, it's because they are. They've been scanned in and then upgrading the resolution to where they look brand new. The Pterodogs are practical effects when stationary, otherwise the moving models are CG. The biggest challenge was incorporating Harold Ramis into the movie when the actor had passed away in 2014. What the VFX department did was scan in the negatives of the original movie and then made a CG Harold and have the first movie with a digital Egon to where you would not be able to tell the difference. Although, from these comparison shots you can tell it's CG, but when Harold's likeness has been inserted into the movie and to where he's a translucent figure, it actually helps the finished look, as you can have the suspension of disbelief. It's something akin to that of Obi-Wan's Force Ghost from Star Wars. The proton streams look as good as before as to where they, like with the other visual effects, they've been taken from the original to where they've been upgraded. The colour of the streams reminds me of the orange light used in Tron Legacy. Considering that this movie was done on a budget of $75 million, Jason Reitman spent his budget accordingly, and I think he did it well. Rob Simonson studied Elmer Bernstein's Ghostbusters score extensively and even enlisted Bernstein's son, Peter, who guided the orchestration of Simonson's score and the use of material from Ghostbusters as a score consultant. That's why I feel this movie has the feel of the first movie, as the score is almost using, note for note, the same score.
You know, normally I would chastise a picture for doing this, but this actually helped the movie's tone and overall finished product.
It had the right balance for humor, horror, and triumph. It felt like it was a way for the audience to not only say goodbye to Egon, but Harold as well.
Yep, there was not a dry eye in the audience, and this movie could not end any other way.
Ghostbusters Afterlife grossed a profit of $204 million against a budget of $75 million. Now, after only a year of inflation, that would be $218.3 million. Paul Degenerate of Comscore said Ghostbusters Afterlife opened to a really solid number that showed the brand is really powerful even some 37 years after the original became a cultural phenomenon. The Associated Press noted the crucial difference between this film and the 2016 reboot is that Ghostbusters Afterlife cost about half as much to make. Variety described the film's opening weekend box office numbers as stronger than expected, and an important victory for the studio after it failed in 2016 to revive the decades-old series. Sherry Linden of The Hollywood Reporter described the film's cast as engaging and having the comic beats down, and added, they also play more fully fleshed people than the first film offered, reflecting the director's interest in character-driven stories. She also noted some similarities between the film and Stranger Things, The Wizard of Oz, and Close Encounters of the Third Kind. Scott Mendelsohn of Forbes gave the film a score of 6 out of 10, describing it as a charming and witty kid-centric coming-of-age fantasy, but criticized its reliance on pandering nostalgic fan service. Dan Aykroyd has 3 sequels in mind where the surviving cast would appear in.
Oh, but of course there's that old adage of, if Bill Murray can be persuaded. I mean, it took long enough just for Ghostbusters Afterlife to get made.
In June 2022, Jason Reitman announced a sequel will take place in New York with the Spengler family becoming residents of the firehouse, and is scheduled for release on December 20, 2023.
The movie has been enjoyed since 2021 on DVD, Blu-ray, and 4K. I'm MJ Knight, and we experienced Ghostbusters Afterlife.